same thing, but we get a different result here.
So now you're moving into this century. It's been so long.
So I do a little recap, and then I jump right into the new century and the changes that happened within that century. So my century is 1880 to 1925, and I stretched it to 1925 because the vestry minutes and the parish messenger, that's how they catalog it with the ones that are upstairs. So I'll be covering rectors at the time, the parish messenger, the Church of a People of War, which was a sermon that was done by Gilbert, a parish or parish organizations and missions, the pandemic, stepping into the new century, the expansion of the church, mission services campaign, and electricity, and our invitation to celebrate our centenary. So we had 5 rectors at the time. The first one was Reverend Francis Chase. Are you able to see? I'm sure. He was a pastor when the church was destroyed on Palm Sunday, 1882. And he resigned, but was called Rector Emeritus, I guess Rector for life, was allowed to use the parsonage until his death, and he's buried in our churchyard. We have Reverend Schuler, Livingston Schuler, 1901 to 1908. He was committing to repairing the church. He was involved in the second violent argument over the litany desk. The first was over the robe, the green robe. The second was over the litany desk, and it was violent because it seemed like there was some altercation outside of the church. It stood at the head of the aisle, and he resigned in 1908, pressured to, and he and his wife are buried in the churchyard. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them as I just go through, because there's some stories behind these reverends. Drama at all times, right? Reverend William Chavez is 1908 to 1917. During his tenure, the discussion was around the expansion of the church. It occurred a couple times, but the vestry, there was a significant change in the vestry. In that time, we moved from 8 to 9 members, and the terms were 3 years. Remember, we had our longest vestry member, 60 odd years, and 2 years for the wardens. He resigned under pressure by the vestry, and he's buried in the churchyard. So he voluntarily resigned, but this one has some information that I'll provide you later. That's Reverend Jarvis. Reverend Charles Gilbert, very prominent man because he moved to the diocese role. His tenure was short-lived, but he became Secretary of the Diocese of New York from 1930 to 1946. And in 1947 to 1950, he became Bishop of the Diocese of New York. He implemented the practice of giving a full report of activities during our annual meetings, which we're doing now. And he set plans to move the organ and the choir to the front of the church before they were at the back. Reverend Alan Chalmer, 1920 to 1935, he oversees what we call the grand transformation, meaning the building and expansion of St. James. The church was expanding in 1976. But I wanted to talk about Reverend William Jarvis. He lived in the rectory, but moved to rent Jerome House on Crane Road facing the church. The rectory was beyond his means to maintain, and it was rented for $60 at the time, and $50 was what we gave to him as a stipend for his rent. During his time, discussion was around the expansion of the church. As you know, and you'll hear a little bit about the architect, Upton, who was a vestry member at the time, but that withdrew when he became our client, meaning he's working on behalf of the church. All right, so that's it. I wanted to, Jarvis was voted out by the vestry. And I only call this out because there was some things going on, but he and his wife, as you see, so Carlos Fish, who was a vestry member, was very unhappy that the senior warden voted Jarvis to have Jarvis out. So he deeded 2 of his plots to Jarvis, and that's why Jarvis is buried in our plot today. So I wanted to point that out. Yep. So these are the faces of the rectors. I took it from Louis Clark's book. I couldn't find some pictures for all of them, but that's how they looked during that time. And these were some significant people who contributed to our growth early before our expansion. Our father here, one who actually started the St. James Popham, Mr. Popham, and deeded the lot of land to us. But as you see, I pull this up because it's very significant that our church played such a great role in politics and government, right? So Chief Justice of New York State was Mars, right? William Popham was a general, but a friend to Washington in the Revolutionary War, and later President General Council. And then we have Tompkin, who was a vice president to the United States. Yes, in 1807 to 1817. James Fenimore, he was an author. And then you have our two vestry members, Crane and Hyatt, during that time. And then we have the supervisor, Scarsdale Secor, Tompkins Secor. So, I mean, at that time, we had some really significant people in our church that really carved maybe some of the laws here in New York because they were very active in government. So how did they communicate at that time within our church? And it really was through the Parish Messenger, which was like a newsletter that started. It was published in 1980, and it was really focused on promoting and welcoming new parishioners, outlining church activities, but it played a great communication medium after post-war to get the church and community together. It was published by the men's chapter, and I'll tell you a little bit about the men's chapter later down, but the first subscription was 50 cents, and then they had, difficulties because there was a labor dispute, so there was no one to print, and there was another time that it didn't get printed. It was twice in the history, but this one is significant because it crossed the whole of New York State because of the labor dispute. The book, as I said, I went to 1925, 1926 because the Parish Messenger actually was cataloged that way. But inside the document, you'll see it looking as the screenshots that I have there. So in the Messenger, what did they include? They include a rector's message, the men's chapter meeting information, when they meet, it would be published. They have something called the honor roll, and you'll hear a little bit more about this. So keep these in mind as their recurring themes as I go through. And then a prayer for friends and relatives in active service. There was a calendar of events for the months. There was some parish organization information there. And they had 4 services during that time. Last service was at 4:30 p.m. Mother Stormy got to step it up. And then you had Parish Notes, and then Ad Space promoting businesses in Scarsdale. In 1919, the Messenger was in a financial crisis because they were, looking for subscription, and if each person was charged 50 cents, then they would cover the cost of publication. But I guess some people, not everyone paid. So many wondered if they should continue. So there was something printed in the Messenger, this is the time to renew your subscription, like our annual campaign, right? Thanks to most efficient and energetic business manager, we finished our last year with all our bills paid. You can help to relieve the Messenger anxiety for the coming year by paying your dues. So in the Parish Messenger, one of the first article is the Church of a People at War. And as you know, there were a lot of wars going on at that time. The church was heavily involved because they were impacted, but there was a conflict between supporting the war and supporting the church. And sometimes it became a major discussion amongst parishioners. So there was an article that was written in one of the newspapers talking about the church and their role in this war and why they were so silent. And our reverend responded with a sermon, and it's titled The Church of a People of War. So the impact of multiple wars was felt deeply with the church and the community. Many parishioners were drafted. So we had the Revolutionary War, 1776, War of Independence, 1812, Civil War. I think Russell's presentation is going to go through a lot of probably in depth about the wars during that time. But the Spanish-American War, 1898, and World War I, 1914, 11, 19, that's a lot of wars during that time, right? And then later we had the Korean War and then the Vietnam War. The church lived through the Lincoln assassination, as you know, 1865, and in World War II, more than 400 men and women from the parish were enlisted and drafted, meaning family within that family. All drafted and enlisted names were posted in the parish messenger, including in memoriam, those that died. And the church members, a lot of church members experienced some devastating loss. But many donated things in their memory that's, I think, are around the church for those that died in that war. And then there was a honor roll, which was created for all active men and women of the parish who were in service. Their names were read out at the 11 a.m. service, and St. James rallied them up together to support the war efforts, whether through fundraising, care packages, or writing letters. And then there was a proposal at the end of the war to memorialize these soldiers. And so you'll see that around Scarsdale and even in our graveyard. We supported during that time, that period of time, a lot of war effort to fund the war. And this is where the conflict is, with the church and supporting the war. But they found that galvanizing people was great through the church, sort of emphasizing the support and the need. So we participated in many efforts. The War Commission Fund, which the fund awarded was to preserve and promote building sites and cemeteries. The Third Liberty Loan, which is our Rector Gilbert headed. He serves on the committee appointed by the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And we sold bonds during that time to fund the war. We had a war loan organization, the diocese, War Drive campaign created to generate funds to distribute to various churches to help them and the impacted families during that war. The messenger included a prayer to help drive success for the campaign. It was sort of called that every name canvas was created. The every name canvas is really the nationwide campaign, but it was created. Everyone who donated had their name memorialized or printed somewhere on that canvas. And then we had a united offering, which is the woman auxiliary of the church, getting funds and presenting that at conventions. We attended many conventions, every triannual meeting. It was heard that our church also gave the most and was presented to extend the work. The funds that they gave was presented to extend the work of the kingdom. Then we had the war bonds, which was issued to raise funds for the war. Church participated in the purchase of the Liberty Bond to finance the war. And then we have what we call the nationwide campaign, which was mainly to get souls for Christ. Through the national campaign, we developed a registry of our members and their address and started doing some active mailings to advertise a lot of the things that were going on in the church. And so we had, at that time, index card. I didn't realize that index card went back that far back. So now we're in 1882, and we had the church fire. So in 1882, we had a fire that destroyed the building. The church was initially built in 1864, suffered significant damages. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to go into the expansion of the church after we sort of rebuilt. The community rallied to reconstruct, and there was a strong commitment to have a place of worship and to rebuild. The event sparked discussion within Scarsdale about fire safety and preservation of historical buildings in the area. Community meetings were held to address these concerns, leading to increased awareness and initiative of safeguarding our historic sites. Overall, St. James, the Les Fire served as a catalyst really for those conversations, ultimately deepening the community appreciation to restore and maintain our history. Let me see if I missed anything. And I may go back and tell you one or two fun facts, but here, before the fire, after the fire. And I think that's at the front of the altar, the church. I took these from Louise Clark's book, actually, so you have an idea. They tried to make the church almost look the same after the fire, not too different. So a lot of innovation was occurring in the 1900s that drove some of our changes and expansion. Because as the church grew, the community around us grew. And so I just wanted to call out those innovation that occurred during that time. So there was mass production during that time. There was the assembly line. There was the electric grid that was created. There was steam power. In 1823, the first road built between Hagertown and Boonesboro. I don't even know where that I tried to look. They may have changed. But the type of construction at that time was, as you see, concrete stones for the roads. And then in 1824, the cement was invented. And then in 1832, we had glass making. And you can see that throughout the church and the glass panes that we have. The first record of a pair of window was the Bates window, donated in 1890, given in memory of Alfred and Lucille Bates, created by Tiffany. Created with the cluster of lily, a symbol of resurrection. The Bates were one of the early settlers within Scarsdale. And that drove urbanization for us in the 1900s. So how did it impact St. James? So during this period, St. James the Less served as a growing population for our Scarsdale development in the suburban community. The church became known for its active congregation and various community service. The early 1900s saw an influx of new members, leading to the expansion of programs and outreach efforts. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, really, they were all employed in like agriculture, employed as farmers or landowners. Organizations, the amount of organizations, I could not list them. But there was an organization for everything. If you thought about it, we have an organization, and it's an organization of 2 or 3 members, but they served a purpose, right? So we had the Sunday school, which is a part of our church. We had the men's chapter, then the woman auxiliary, then we had little helpers, we had altar guilds, we had St. Philip's Guild, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those. We had the finance committee, we had the women's guild, the ladies committee, we had the vestry committee, the repairs and supply committee, the churchyard committee, the music committee, the communicant guild, and then the supply department was a branch of women auxiliary formed in 1921, which they sent clothing and necessary household items to the missions that we supported. They made compress and bandages to send to the hospitals. It was open to all, and so one of our church members was the chair, and she was a member of the church, Mrs. Witherspoon. Let me see if I missed anything. So the men's club was the men's chapter was one of the oldest men's club in Westchester history. And there was they were the ones that started the parish messenger, as we talked about. Let me see, what else did I miss of that time? Okay. So in the parish messenger, you'll see the parish organization, and they do list it. You'll see the mission of each of the auxiliaries. So for example, the treasurer or the vestry stated when they would meet, but like the woman auxiliary, their mission is to promote by prayer and study and gifts, the missionary enterprise of the church and the home abroad. I think there were a couple more. The women's guild to do useful sewing for the mission, and that's what that group did mainly during that time. The men's chapter, the objective is to promote the good of the parish and to stimulate a common interest among its members. And that was the driving mission for the parish messenger that was done by the men's chapter. As you see, there's a lot of men doing everything, men building, men running. Women were not able to, do a couple things during that time, and you'll see a little bit of it as we go through here. On one slide, I have to make sure I stay in time and I don't bore. Everybody is with me here?
Yeah.
Good. All right. So service and mission. After the American Revolution, the religious groups flourished because they realized we can galvanize people within the church to give, to support. And so the church was a medium for all of that. But we are here to save souls and to help others, right? So we participated in many ministries. St. Luke's Hospital in Japan was one of our missions. Chasugura, Japan, and I'll read a little bit about Miss Tabika, the Christian teacher. She's Japanese, but she became Christian. Imagine trying to be a Christian during that time, right? And within these Asian countries that do not practice Christianity, right? And they were able to get souls through the mission of Christ. Educating American Indians on the trail. They were in the Philippines. They were paying for a lowly missionary priest in Alaska. We were feeding the hungry, sending flowers to the sick, donating to the American Relief Administration. Elizabeth Crane, a member of our church, I was a treasurer. We were donating to the Red Cross. Red Cross was existent in that period of time. Red Cross goes way back. And then the women auxiliary were sending boxes to a base that was in Greenwood, South Dakota. But mainly the diocese ran what we call the national campaign, which they call the Every Name campaign, to support the church ministry. And as you see, as they promoted, churches like St. James started to galvanize and support a lot of missions around the world. Because after all, we're a church and we're here to save souls and get souls for Christ. But they funded it through offerings and different events that they had. The offerings went to the service of the church, the diocese, and the missions that we had. So I was a nationwide campaign. It was a finance canvas for the church is in the diocese. And the first goal was the spiritual growth of the church. And it was a church responsibility to train. They wanted to train several persons for Christian leadership in the church, to care for the needs of the presiding bishop and the council, to care for all the provinces, the diocese, and the missionary district. And so they had a major campaign, and this campaign actually generated almost $4 million during that time. That's a lot of money for the diocese. St. James was committed to donating 3,000, but hoped to reach 3,009 during that campaign, and they did. The bishop at the time was Reverend Charles Summer Birch, and the goal is to have every family make a personal pledge of service and support to the church programs. So I talked a little bit I wanted to talk about our Japanese mission, because when you think of Christianity in an Asian country that they're probably Buddhists or Hindus, and we were able to at least galvanize and get someone to begin preaching the gospel. And so let me tell you a little story about Miss Julie Emmerich. Miss Julie Emmerich was a parishioner of St. James. She visited visited Japan and met Mrs. Takiba, a Christian teacher, and asked her how she became a Christian. She was a devoted child in her faith, but there was always something lacking in her faith, and she never found peace. At age 18, she went to study English at the older place that was a mission school. Once a study, she noticed something different about the preaching and the people. They were kind. Again, every word came from the heart. She asked them why the mission told her. Well, they told her a story of Moses and the serpent in the wilderness. Only those who looked were healed, and only those who believed would get the blessings. And so but she ended up getting to the church and meeting Miss Takiba. The bishop had traveled with her, and the bishop and his wife took communion and gave some rites when she came, but it was a story that was significant to St. James as they set out for Christ's work everywhere. So Miss Julie Emmerich went to a lot of different missions within the Asian community, including Japan. And then let me see, there is our Chinese mission. Miss Richmond and Julie Emmerich went to Long Kai to visit a church. That was one of the missions that St. James was supporting. It's not a church building, but church people was there. There was no church. The mission brought a Chinese house, our mission, the diocese mission. They bought a church home in China, 28 rooms with several courtyards, cost 3,900 US, and they were giving gold at that time, 1,950 in gold to purchase. Very cheap in China, as it was known as the haunted house. In the nights, they would hear spirits and weird sounds, and more than one person died in that house. It was acquired by Bishop Graves to set up as a boy and girl school and a place for preaching. It was run by Mr. Tom, a Chinaman who was a converted Christian and given charge of the place by the bishop. He and his wife were praying and healing people. So there was a lot of healing going on. As I read through, Mr. Tong, a Chinaman, seemed to have been healing a lot of people, and so people were coming to the church and being converted. And so I guess miracles are in the Bible, and a miracle for life, people connected with those messages and that experience. So as I talked, there were a lot of organizations that we had, but women didn't play a major role during that time. And it was because some women probably didn't want to be as active in those roles, but it was at that time, I guess, the law. I'm trying to find where it is in the law, but I guess just the precedent at that time. On November 29, 1915, it was confirmed and adopted that the rector, church warden, and vestryman determined that women have the qualification to vote in the parish matters, including the vestrymen. So before that, Martha Stormforth would not be heard, right? In 1918, the Diocese Branch of Women Auxiliary, also in New York, they were not able to vote, and they had a proposal. One of the proposals was to appoint women on the diocese branch, within the diocese. I probably need to do some more research here, but they were not active during that time. They had to put a proposal through. And then not only that, there were the Scarsdale Women's Club that a lot of our church members were a part of. The church that club actually bought the local paper for $1 called the Scarsdale Inquirer, but they won many awards. And our Reverend, his wife, Ruth Nash Charmer, she was the editor for that newspaper, but they won the paper was in existence for 40 years with 5,000 subscribers, and it started only with 400 in 1919. I do have something here on the, okay, in 1915, a group of how this was formed, the Scarsdale Women's Club. In 1915, a group of public-spirited women began meeting to pursue their civic interests. The women's suffrage movement was big at that time, and during the World War I, they worked together with the Red Cross, Liberty Bonds, and welcoming drafted soldiers and returning veterans. After the war, a core group wanted to just continue the Women's Club, and that's how the Scarsdale Women's Club began. I don't know, does anyone know where it's located? Right here, right? I've never been, I plan to drive by there. Yeah. So it's not too far from us here. We talked about the vestry tenure at the time, and it seemed like we had to file with the New York State to make a change, because there is a State of New York, County of Westchester, signed by the clerk of the Court of Westchester. I certified the proceedings with the certificate, and it was in our vestry minutes amongst the changing of the rules to increase the numbers on the vestment. So I have to figure out, and I'm not sure why we have to do a filing here, but there's a record.
Yeah.
There's a record and a stamp.
Yeah.
The 17th, and it says the 17th day of June, 1913. So, yeah. So I guess if we change the vestry numbers again, there may be something that we have to.
Yeah.
But that was actually surprising for me, and that's why I copied it. But it says that the following resolutions were duly adopted by the vestry of said corporation at the meeting where we are a nonprofit. So maybe because of that change.
We're a religious corporation under New York law, and New York law has a separate religious corporation section. And for Episcopal churches, there are different sizes of the vestry that you could be.
Oh.
Anywhere, if you're a small church, you could be like 3, and I think the largest you could be is in the 20s.
Oh.
And so
okay.
we picked a number, and you've got a file, so that you've told the state what the governing body is. And I think if we change it, we have to file again.
I guess makes sense.
Nonprofit status.
Nonprofit is a status for tax
Tax
purposes, but
purposes.
under the state law, which is also nonprofit, we're a religious corporation, which is different from a not-for-profit corporation.
Yeah, interesting. And that caught my eye, and I was like, well, we're a nonprofit. And then it says corporation. So I needed to do some, but thank you for explaining. Thank you. At one point, a little bit, there were some changes to our finance and how the diocese was pulling or asking the church for money, and they call it appropriation, which is the church being assigned a quota to support the church activities of the parish. None of this was related to the mission or the levy that the diocese actually gives each church as their donation. But what they emphasize is that after this radical change of not giving quota, they ask every year members will be asked to give what they can afford for the support of the church. So Barbara, you were asking for, they were asked to give what they could afford for the support of the church, and that money was sent to the treasurer for the annual campaign. 28% was sent to the diocese. So I guess whatever money they got through that annual campaign, 28% was sent to the diocese. And the funds will go to the diocese treasurer and not the mission houses. So before they were sending money to the mission houses that were dispersing, but they made some change and all funds went to the diocese treasurer. The new order does not affect any levies at the diocese convention. I think at the convention, they talk about how much money, I guess, the churches should be donating, but that, I guess that's when you know how much St. James need to give every year. Commitment to the mission. So as people were giving, they needed to be encouraged a bit, right? And so there was a consistent message. Gift is not a measure by its largeness. A sacrifice, and I took this from the meeting minute. It's the sacrifices of those that have abundance. The voice of our conscience will tell us how much to give. If we heed the voice, we cannot go wrong. Money represents a service we can render to our fellow men. We can use it for selfish pleasures, and we can store it for future. We can use it all, however little or much, some of it belongs to God. Money was divided to help with the parish work, and some was sent monthly to the diocese treasurer for the church's mission.
Okay, so Tony, will you say this next week?
I like, look, Mother Storm sends out our parish messenger weekly, so maybe that should be there. So I talked about the full report that Reverend Gilbert had implemented when he left to join the Diocese of New York. He wanted us to give a full report at our annual meeting. So I saw when we originally, in 1879, I saw us doing our budget in this archaic sort of pencil way, we'll do at home, but then it became very sophisticated and laid out in 1926, how monies were going and coming, and how, what we were collecting, the plumbing and the maintenance work. And so I wanted to show that. But then there was a big discussion of how we separate our funds. The burial funds and monies from sales of housing to cover general expenses. I guess we used to take money there, but the vestry asked for us to separate those funds going forward. And that was in 1990. I forgot to put the date here. But at that point in time, they decided that you cannot use burial funds and money to fund the general expenses of the church. I don't think we do that today.
No.
We still don't do
Yeah.
we have our separation of funds. And then we go into the pandemic. And you would think for Scarsdale, this was major. It seemed for the whole USA, it was major. But in 1918, they had the Spanish flu. 675 deaths occurred in the US globally. More people were killed by influenza than by World War I, which lasted twice as long as the pandemic. Powerless against the flu owing to the rapid mutation, responses instead focused on containing it. One of the most promoted piece of advice was wear your mask, and you see we're doing the same thing. The slogan was wear a mask, save your life, and that was the 1918 flu pandemic. The outbreak finally ended in the summer of 1919, and it was from the H1N1 virus, and that virus continued for 38 years.
Wow.
So good luck for us. I know we have a couple more years to go. Although the Spanish flu caused havoc, how does it impact Scarsdale? Only 138 cases and only 1 death. So if you look through the parish messenger and the minutes, there's nothing. I couldn't find anything on the Spanish flu. And maybe because they were farmers, they had space, they had land, they weren't, those closed contained spaces. And that was really happening with soldiers, and I guess people were in close proximity, but they only had 1 death. Nothing found in the parish messenger. And this was I saw a couple months that we skipped. And so I thought maybe the church was not as active during that time, but it's sporadic. I really did not find anything. All right, let's see how much time do I have left? Am I out of time?
12:30.
12:30, okay. So this is the expansion of the parish house. Report building, they had a building committee in 1914. The parish house would have cost $35,000. Parts of the funds was received by the loan against the rectory. And that was controversial because people did not want to take loan against the rectory unless they knew that they had funds to cover the interest and taxes. Not everyone agreed. On February 1960, I know a motion was moved to build a parish house by Reverend Jarvis, the rector at the time, and he also asked to appoint a committee of vestrymen to discuss ways of financing. And that was through the pledge. Some was supposed to be through the pledge. Most of it should have been through the pledge. Then we had the expansion of the Sunday school in September 1921. There was overcrowding, and it seemed like during that time, the growth of the Sunday school was an indicator of success. If you had a big Sunday school, your church was doing great because those young souls were coming up to lead the church. And every pastor during that time had some goal on increasing the Sunday school, and so it was major for us. We had a drawing by Herbert Upjohn, who was the architect, a member of St. James and an ex-vestry member. The new section was going to be in harmony with the church. It was supposed to room 280 kids, done to preserve they wanted to preserve the greystone and for the growth in the future. The church had $4,000 to build the parish house, but it cost $35,000, right? That was what they had in their funds. But the vestry voted to use that money to build the Sunday school. The treasurer at the time was Crane, no endowment, church supports it, money has been given to the mission and taken care of. So the money was going to other things, and so they had to find a way to fund, but it was $35,000. I think I missed a zero here, sorry. Let's go back here. Yeah, right? Cost between 20 and 35. Okay. So there's a conversation in the vestry minutes about, getting this approved. The first unit will be completed with steam, heat, and toilet for $20K. The church, at that time when it came up again in 1921, the church only had $6,000 in funds. But, so Upton, the architect here, Upjohn, he created some specs for us, and it seemed like, not everybody was pleased with the specs. So the church was asking him for his prints, and he decided that he was not going to give it over because he wanted to finish his work. From the above statement, I cannot accept, the church wanted to give him $240 for him to hand over those specs. He wanted really to finish it. It had to go to the vestry to release the funds to him. But he said, I will complete the plans and details at this time, revising them to meet any criticism, giving the church sufficient copies for the sum of $720. This charge, as you will see, is enclosed and is at 3.6% on the assumed cost of $20K. The church may build at any time. If either case of the church accepting B or C, and he gave them some options that they could, to hand over or to complete the specs, he gave them some options that the vestry had to vote on, and he signed. But he did continue to work and updated the specs. So it wasn't all smooth sailing when he, create, and I think we go through even that today for expansion, back and forth. This was a resignation that I saw during the time of 1970 when Jarvis resigned. So he gave his resignation, but someone at the vestry wrote a letter objecting to his resignation. And so it's right here also. Let me see.
He was less than a year, right?
Yeah, he was here less than a year, but need I say how sober I am in the face of obligation? I'm venturing to assume, I can only assume that I'm ready to. So this was when Guilford, and then this is the new, within a year, Guilford, our new rector. This is his letter of accepting the job. So Jarvis resigned, and then Guilford took that role. Let me go here. So here's the church expansion timeline. I think, let me go over this side again. 1922, the church house was built, the crossing, where's the transept?
Those are the, where the kids sit and the opposite, the
Two sides.
No, the side piece was added in 1925. I was like, where is that? The present rectory at Rochambeau was acquired in 1945. The clergy house 17 was acquired in 1949. So we had a lot of real estate, and in the minutes you could see a lot of contractual documents signing over the deed of land to the church. New building or being sold. New buildings for the church activities and cluster was done in 1952. So this is a new expansion of the church of St. James during that time. My period is not 1952, I just got, we found that picture here. The church at the time was 489 families. And then they also looked at the insurance policy and increased it, the amount of coverage that we had. And that's in our vestry minutes also. So now with all of that expansion and that growth, and winter in New York, we do have electricity, and I showed all the innovations that were going on during that time. Scarsdale in the old days, you had lantern perched on post. If you're heading home late, you had your own lantern. Scarsdale got gas late at the rates, and it was expensive. Many thought moving to gas would increase the population, which it did. Electricity even made it worse. Telephone service became available in May 1882. There were 15 subscribers in the Metropolitan Telephone and Telegraph Company. Included are 2 subscribers, and you'll see the name Adams and Popham, who had White Plains number 12 number and number 11 number. To call New York, it was 25 cents. Yonkers, 10 cents for 5 minutes. The railroad reached Scarsdale in 1895 when a trolley was built on the east side of Post Road, never left that trolley. I have to walk some of these trails and see if there's any remnants of it. Bus line began in 1910 in Green Acres, running from White Plains to Hartsdale. So you see the transition and the innovation and the industrial move. The coming of electricity. Electricity light was available in 1900, provided by White Plains Lighting Company. It was moved to Westchester Lighting Company in 1912, and it was established by the Consolidated Edison Company of New York in 1913. So in 1913, you could get gas and electricity, but from the White Plains Westchester Lighting Company. Electricity made a significant advance for the church, enhancing its functionality and service. Regarding the furnace, the heating system, which likely included a furnace, was built around the same period, reflecting the growth need for the modern amenities in the church. This also allowed the church to provide more comfortable environments for the parishioners. I don't know what they were doing those.
There was a fireplace, that big grate that's still there in the middle. There was a coal.
A coal there that they put in the
downstairs
coal.
in the basement, yeah.
I was trying to see how did they get
Somebody
heat
had
at
it.
that time, and I could not. Okay.
Yeah.
So electricity at that time was at 1/8 of a 10 kilowatts, $18 for 100. In 1928, it was $1.05 for 10 and $10.25. So as you see, as the years went by, electricity got cheaper, right? And then you had Einstein with his innovation. And then you saw that now we started capturing in 1914 the cost of coal and the cost of electricity. It was the first time I found some record of it in 1914. So 1913, they started getting electricity within Scarsdale, and in 1914, somewhere within the year, it was in our disbursement. Okay, so let me see, what else do I have left? There was an electric blower, so the organ at that time, someone had to be pumping. So January 22, an electric organ blower was installed in the church. It replaced the pumps for the organ by hand. It meant a piece can be played before service without the physical exertion of a choir member. There was a choir member, his name was Carlos De Carlo, a member of the church choir, was extremely happy as he was pumping for many years.
I wonder if he had to sing and pump.
He had to pump at the beginning of the service, he had an interlude, and then he was the happiest camper after that came. And then with all this expansion and innovation, we had a celebration, our 50th centennial, and Jim Bolton sent me this invitation because I didn't find it, but this was the first 50th anniversary invitation that went out by Schuler, and he tells you the train leaves at Grand Central Station, Harlem Railway at 9:35. The Reverend clergy are requested to bring their vestment with hoods and white stoles. So yeah. And during that time, with William Popham and Margaret, they were the first church warden. And then here are all our vestry members. So that's the end of my presentation. And the library. And I had to take home the vestry minutes because it was huge and so much to read. But thank you very much. Yay! I think Russell is the next.
And our next one is in Russell.
Oh, the Russell Grant.
Russell Grant. Oh, yeah, no, Russell Grant. Oh, Russell Grant. Yeah.
I don't recall off the top of my head, I think it's in.
His is in February. So I have to look. at
But
my-
you'll know, read the email.
I think we should get the men to do more again. I mean, the men were.
I know, exactly.
Right?
I know, there was such a powerful group.
I mean, there's some advantages to having men do all of that.
But look how better they are with women.
With all that activity, they wanted to do.
I love that. The more things.
You really want to go.
And we had to get a vote. We had to get a vote to participate. They can vote you out, they can vote you in. But thank you guys.
Oh!